In the darkest hours of the night, in a hospital filled with dying soldiers, a single woman walked the endless rows of beds, a small lamp glowing in her hand. To the suffering men, she was an angel. To history, she would become a legend. Her name was Florence Nightingale, and she would transform nursing from a lowly, despised trade into a noble and respected profession. Armed with compassion, an iron will, and a brilliant mind for numbers, she would save countless lives and reform the medicine of an empire. This is the story of the lady with the lamp, the woman who walked through darkness so that others might live, and lit a flame that still burns in every hospital in the world today. Florence Nightingale was born in 1820 into a wealthy and cultured British family during a long holiday in the Italian city whose name she would carry for life. She grew up in grand country houses, surrounded by privilege, expected to do nothing more than marry well and host elegant parties. She was beautiful, brilliant, and fluent in many languages. By every measure of her age, her future was already written. But Florence felt a deep and restless emptiness in that gilded world. The endless social calls and idle luxury felt suffocating to her. From a young age, she sensed that she was meant for something greater, something useful, something that would give her life true meaning. She simply did not yet know what it was. When she was 17, Florence believed she heard the voice of God calling her to a life of service. Slowly, she came to understand her purpose. She would become a nurse. But in Victorian England, nursing was considered a degraded and disreputable trade, no place for a respectable young lady. Her family was horrified. For years they forbade her, hoping she would abandon the idea and marry. Florence refused. She turned down proposals of marriage, endured her family's anger, and secretly taught herself everything she could about hospitals and health. Quietly, patiently, with unbreakable determination, she prepared for the calling she could not ignore. The privileged daughter was willing to give up everything, her comfort, her reputation, and her family's approval, to answer it. At last, in her 30s, Florence broke free. She traveled to Germany to train at a pioneering institute that taught nursing to women and studied hospitals across Europe. She learned how they were run, how the sick were cared for, and how often they were neglected. When she returned to London, she took charge of a struggling hospital for gentlewomen and transformed it with ruthless efficiency and tireless energy. She reorganized everything, improved the care, and proved that a woman could run an institution brilliantly. Florence had found her calling at last, and she was extraordinarily good at it. But her true test, the one that would make her a legend, was waiting for her far away, on the blood-soaked battlefields of a distant war. In 1854, Britain went to war in the Crimea. Soon, shocking reports reached London. British soldiers were dying in horrifying numbers, not just from their wounds, but from disease and neglect in filthy, overwhelmed military hospitals. The public was outraged. The government turned in desperation to Florence Nightingale. She agreed at once and assembled a team of 38 nurses, leading them across the sea to the war. Nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to find. When they arrived at the great barrack hospital at Scutari, they walked into a vision of hell, a place of unimaginable suffering, where the living lay among the dying, and death seemed to rule over everything. The hospital at Scutari was a nightmare. Thousands of wounded men lay packed together without clean water, without proper food, without basic sanitation. The drains were blocked. Vermin crawled everywhere, and infection spread unchecked. More soldiers were dying inside the hospital than on the battlefield itself. Many of the army officers resented Florence and resisted her at every turn. but she would not be stopped. With a relentless force of will, she scrubbed the wards, demanded supplies, organized kitchens and laundries, and fought to bring order out of the chaos. Slowly, methodically, she began to drag that house of death back toward life. What she could not yet prove was just how many lives her simple reforms were about to save. It was in those long nights at Scutari that the legend was born. Long after the other staff had gone to rest, Florence would take up her lamp and walk alone through the dark wards, checking on each suffering soldier, offering comfort to the frightened and the dying. To the wounded men, that small light in the darkness became a symbol of hope itself. They called her the Lady with the Lamp. Newspapers back home carried her story, and she became famous across the entire nation. But Florence cared little for fame. What mattered to her were the men and the simple, revolutionary idea that cleanliness, care, and compassion could save their lives. And remarkably, the death rate in her hospital began to fall. Florence Nightingale was far more than a gentle nurse. She was also a brilliant and pioneering scientist. Back in England, she gathered mountains of data on how the soldiers had died and made a startling discovery. Far more had been killed by preventable disease than by enemy weapons. To prove it, she invented strikingly clear and beautiful diagrams, including her famous rose chart that revealed the truth at a single glance. She became one of the first people in history to use statistics to change public policy. With her evidence, she forced the British Army and government to reform military medicine forever. Her compassion had saved soldiers during the war. Now her mathematics would go on to save countless more. Florence returned to England a national hero, but she refused to rest on her fame. She was determined to make nursing a respected and skilled profession, open to women everywhere. In 1860, using funds raised in her honor, she founded the Nightingale Training School for Nurses in London, the first of its kind in the world. She wrote a small book, Notes on Nursing, that became famous around the globe and is still read today. Her ideas about hygiene, fresh air, and careful observation transformed hospitals everywhere. Thanks to Florence, the despised trade she had once fought her own family to enter became one of the most honored and trusted callings on earth. For the last decades of her life, Florence was often confined to her bed, weakened by an illness she had likely caught in the war. Yet even bedridden, she never stopped working. From her room, she wrote thousands of letters and reports advising governments, designing hospitals, and reforming healthcare across the British Empire and beyond. She had become one of the most influential people of her century. When she died peacefully in 1910, at the age of 90, the whole world mourned the woman who had changed medicine forever. Today, on her birthday, we honor nurses everywhere, the inheritors of the very flame she first carried through the darkness. Florence Nightingale, the lady with the lamp, who lit the way for all who heal.